Hi, welcome to Cubs in Culture for February 8th, 2018. It's mostly going to be about Maddon. But there's a funny rivalry thing going on between the Cubs and Brewers at this point. Okay, so the joke among Cubs fans is Miller Park, which is the Brewers' home park, is actually Wiggly North, because when the Cubs played the Brewers there, 3/4 maybe. I feel like that's an understatement, actually. At least a couple of times I've been there. It's not Brewers fans, it's Cubs fans, and they utterly swarm the park. It's actually kind of obnoxious. So the Brewers are really kind of going for it this year. So they decided to hold, I don't know how this is being enforced, but they're having a pre-sale starting today on Cubs tickets where you have to be a member of, you have to live in Wisconsin to be able to buy them, which I don't think is going to work because, for one thing, I live in Wisconsin, so I could buy one. And so there's actually Cubs fans in Wisconsin. In any case, there's that. Okay, anyways, I want to talk about management and style in general and use Maddon as sort of an example. Why today? Well, Maddon his birthday is today, and it also happens to be my birthday. It's kind of neat to me that I have shared the same birthday as Joe Maddon because Joe Maddon is not just like one of my favorite baseball people or one of my favorite managers of all time. I think like Joe Maddon's sort of like among my favorite people. He's very, very hippie-ish, especially for a baseball manager. He really is sort of like an ideal sort of person in terms of he really does know how to keep things in perspective. And I think a lot of times in baseball, people don't keep things in perspective. And in any case, I want to talk a little bit about management for that reason. Okay, so every single time people talk about management in general, everyone always goes immediately to complaining about relief pitching changes. And this is somewhat annoying to me because, relief pitching changes are the very, very tip of an iceberg, where the vast majority of what a manager does in terms of his job it's not seen directly by the fans. And I don't necessarily, I think it shows up in the statistics, but it doesn't, it's not obvious how it shows. There's not a clear causal line, per se, that we know of how it, in the same way that relief pitching changes shows up in the statistics. In any case, so, in my mind, managing in-game tactics is only 25% of what a manager actually does. And even then, relief pitching changes is only in-game stuff is first picking your starter. Some of that's automatic. You just sort of set your rotation, but at any given point, you can make a decision to put someone on short rest or skip someone or as they did last year, have Ho-Sang Tang come up and make a spot start out of the, as sort of a, let's see what this guy has one time. So there's that. That's 5%. Then you have lineup and offense stuff. So who bats first, second, third, etc. Then do you hit here? Do you bunt? Do you double steal? Do you hit and run? Whatever. So there's that, and then there's which is 10%, and then there's relief pitching or pitching managing, and then there's two different decisions when it comes every single time you for pitching changes is, do you take a pitcher out and who do you put in? So only 25% of what a manager does is in-game stuff. The rest of it's all, and I'll spend a lot of time talking about this at the end, or maybe next section, is clubhouse stuff. And the thing is, the reason why I'm bringing this up is Joe Maddon as a manager. If you define good bullpen management as pulling people at the correct time, he's perfectly fine. He actually doesn't ride people too long. That's not really his issue. His issue is he doesn't really. I don't know why. I think it might be a different processes that he uses that doesn't like it's a different process than what sabermetricians recommend. But in any case, if you say matching the relief pitcher to leverage, Maddon is not. He's about for the overall course of his career in terms of matching relief pitcher to leverage. He's about average. Some years, he's better than others where he comes in above average, or some years he comes below average. So if you normalize to 100, like 100 is perfectly average. Maddon almost always falls within 95 to 105 in terms of matching reliever to leverage. So he's not. So in terms of handling pitching, he's not. If you defined handles relief pitching perfectly, Maddon is not a very good manager. But that is that's not even all he's doing. In game tactics. So if you look at the other side of the equation, lineup construction, and double hits, double steals, hit and run, whatever. If you normalize placing people in the correct order versus underlying statistical performance in terms of if the idea again using 100, if 100 is the ideal, like. You know how I was saying a couple of times ago that Bryant should always bat second because you always should have your best player in the second. Well, it's not. So it's not true that it should always be Bryant because there's going to be people who have better days than him. So you should always have the person who's having the best day, in the second slot. But you don't know that. But so overall, in terms of lineup construction, where 100 is absolutely perfect, where if you have God's eye view, you put your offense in absolutely perfect positioning every single game. The average manager gets to about 70% of that. Maddon is often around 80-85% in terms of having ideal lineup construction, which is way above average. And during 2011 with that Rays where they came back from being 9 games out in September, and then winning the wild card, he basically had perfect lineup construction and in-game offense that period. Give me a moment. So if you put these things together, he's in-game tactically, he's slightly below average in terms of defense or pitching, but he's way above average in terms of offense. That, of course, in-game tactics results in a manager who is above average. Okay. Now, the other sort of thing about this, before I get into sort of the bulk of his job that people don't tend to talk about, is one of the funny things is in-game tactics over the length of a season. It does influence the win-loss record, but it's nowhere near as much as you would think. The difference so we have these things called Pantheon projections, which are basically if under idealized conditions, given this number of runs that you've generated versus this many runs that you allowed, how many games would you have won? So if you look at that, so for example, last year the Cubs should have won 93 games based off of their underlying statistical performance. They only won 92. That's almost certainly luck. Bad luck. Or if you go back to the Rays in 2011 when they won, 2009, I think, when they went to the World Series. they won 97 games, but they should have only have won 90 games. Which is partially luck. So if you tried to control for that, then 538 has looked at this, as has Fangraph. It turns out that the difference between like idealized tactics for most teams versus what actually happens, like the manager's effect in terms of in-game tactics overall, is the difference between a perfect tactician and a terrible tactician is for 1 to 2 games. That at the end of the day, in terms of in-game tactics, a manager overall tends to only cost his team 1 or 2 games. So like last year, the Cubs won the division by, so like, yes, the manager having crappy management could cost you like a division, but in most situations it probably won't. It has to be an incredibly tight race, and of course, it's really hard to choose this. So it like tease this out exactly. So it seems to. So if you run the numbers, though, it seems like 1 to 2 games either way. Any case, so that's why it sort of annoys me, because people tend to complain about Joe Maddon, and they immediately go to some of his less reasonable but still perfectly rational decisions in terms of pitching, like riding Chapman too much in the World Series because his circle of trust got too small. Not ideal, but it's understandable. And in any case, as I will point out in the next section, I think someone like Joe Maddon was the only person that was capable of helping the Cubs win the World Series. Okay, I'll be back in a moment.